Tom Hunt, former Conservative MP, because one of the things that happened last week was the vote went through the House of Commons on assisted dying, much to the chagrin of an awful lot of people who are against the bill. Rosa Monckton's written a piece in the Mail today saying, "Why I'll fight in the Lords against this breathtakingly cruel and ignorant bill." Meanwhile, Wes Streeting, the Secretary of State for Health, has said that the NHS doesn't actually have the money for assisted dying. Let's see what Mr Hunt has to say. Tom, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
A lot of people shocked, really, about the way that this bill went through so quickly and without as much, perhaps, conversation around it as many would have preferred there to be. What's your take on it?
Well, I think last week was quite a troubling week because I think that two major things happened that were not in any party's manifesto at the general election. Last Tuesday we had incredibly extreme new radical abortion laws passed by Parliament, pushed by a Labour MP. And then, of course, on Friday we had this assisted dying vote. And, of course, it was a very narrow vote. It was the majority collapsed from 55 at second reading to 23. I mean, that's almost unprecedented, actually, for a private member's bill to drop support so much between second and third reading. But I think there is this sense that almost out of nowhere, these really quite radical sort of once in a generation social changes that suddenly come out of nowhere. And I think it is troubling, but I think it was quite interesting that over the weekend I was reading a lot of the media, and I think the sense is that this is not a done deal. With this. And I also be really clear that I call this assisted suicide, not assisted dying. But I do have this sense, I still have this creeping sense that there's a decent chance that one way or another, this still will not become law.
And what do you think will be the sort of the thing that stops it becoming law? Will it be a realisation that it's not necessary? Because I talk to a lot of people, and I think I'm sort of one of them, actually, who doesn't feel as though we need this. You know, I know that I was speaking to Deanna Davison, actually, last week, because she's operating on behalf of one of the charities that's kind of pushing for this. And she said, you know, it's obviously horrible when people get involved in this type of thing, when they do see a loved one suffering and they maybe go to Dignitas over in Switzerland or whatever, and they then come home and face all sorts of horrible criminal accusations and questioning by the police. But, I mean, I said, yeah, but nobody ever really gets prosecuted, and I just am not sure that you need something like this to be made into law.
I agree. We have a situation that might be a bit sort of messy, but ultimately it's not broken. Don't try and fix it, and particularly don't try and fix it with a dangerous bill which not a single disability organisation has supported, that puts a number of vulnerable groups, young women of anorexia, the Down syndrome community, a lot of those very vulnerable groups have been incredibly vocal time and time again, but we've still had a number of MPs who seem to have voted for this bill, this flawed bill, hoping that the House of Lords are going to sort out some of its problems. Well, their ability to do so will be very limited, but ultimately, I thought it was telling that Wes Streeting made those comments over the weekend, because he'll know that this bill's now past its third reading. So one might have expected that at this stage, as a Health Secretary, he'd previously made his view clear. Maybe he'd sort of go quiet on it. Clearly, the Health Secretary isn't prepared to do that. He feels sufficiently strongly that he doesn't want to do that. And I thought one could read a lot into Wes Streeting's comments. But it's interesting because I don't think this debate's going to die down. The momentum's all in one direction. And look, if you're going to pass, historically, if you pass these sort of major changes in our social, it usually has a strong majority in the House of Commons. It's not 23.
Right.
You know, over half of the majority from second reading to third reading has just disappeared. So I think, I still think there's an opportunity to stop this bill. Certainly it should be made safer. But I also think it's important that we reflect upon what happened last Tuesday. We've now have a situation where it is legal to essentially, to terminate a pregnancy right up until birth. I mean, this is pretty much the most extreme abortion law in Europe. Recent polling shows that only 3% of women actually support that kind of policy. So look, I think a lot of the public will look at what happened last week and they'll say, well, none of this was in any party's manifesto. It wasn't spoken about at the election. Is there a mandate for these kind of radical, drastic changes? And frankly, what's next?
Well, quite. You do wonder, don't you? Because, as you say, neither of these two things particularly cropped up before the election. There was hardly any conversation about it at all. And over the weekend, I was seeing quite a bit of commentary on the sort of the uncomfortable nature of some of the arguments being made in favour of assisted dying, or assisted suicide, as you prefer to call it, particularly from some people who said, oh, well, think of the money we'll save on palliative care. And you're kind of going, well, that's a bit weird, isn't it?
Well, I think it's a very troubling way to think, but it's become very clear as the debate's gone on that the people in the groups who are most nervous about this bill are the voiceless, those without a strong voice, those who are vulnerable, and frankly, they've made it repeatedly clear they want assistance, better assistance to live, not assistance to die. So I will continue to fight this bill. I think that, of course, I would have liked it to have been defeated last week, but I think it's very clear over the weekend media this debate isn't going away. And I still think it can be stopped. Yeah.
Tom, good to talk to you. Just one other thing before I let you go, because you used to be very strong on the migrant hotel problem in this country. Piece of the Times today saying a record number of migrants are appealing against their rejected asylum claims, and their cases are taking over a year to be heard, prolonging their stays in hotels. So not only are there more people arriving constantly, but 50,000 plus, I think it's nearly 51,000, who have been refused asylum are now staying in hotels and will stay in hotels for probably more than a year while their appeal goes through.
I have to say, Mike, that I almost avoid discussing this issue anymore because, frankly, I get so angry when I do.
I know.
I'm
sorry. I didn't know
last
that.
Week, and I just, frankly, I almost lost my cool. I'm incredibly... Because, you know, I was talking about this like a broken record.
Yeah.
For 4 or 5 years, I've said the same thing probably 200, 300 times.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I'm pretty certain the situation is going to continue to get worse. The current government will not take any of the actions it will need to take to sort this sort of stuff out. And of course, and it is getting people out of hotels a solution. Well, it just seems to be moving one problem to another area. We've had examples of illegal migrants being prioritising for sort of affordable housing over local residents. So look, the only solution is a strong radical deterrent to get out of all the various human rights laws that are binding our hands when it comes to taking drastic action, get out of those, the ECHR, and then you can have a credible deterrent, which is sort of offshore processing, a Rwanda scheme which actually involves people going to Rwanda. Right. So look, until that happens, but look, do you think the Labour government are going to do any of that? I don't. Yes, you've got to keep on reporting it, but I have to say, I just get a little bit hot under the collar when I do discuss it, so I'm just trying to,
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to have ruined your Monday morning. I didn't mean to do that to you, but thank you very much indeed. Tom Hunt there on assisted dying and a bit on the asylum seekers at the end, because, of course, how many of these people who have been failed in their attempts to get asylum in this country are possibly people who may do this country harm, who may be from Iran, who may be supporters of the Khomeini regime?